It was an unusual morning, marked by an unsettling quiet that sat heavy in the air. I stood barefoot on the old floorboards of my home, the kettle's whistle piercing through my thoughts. As I stared at the empty shoebox beside the radiator, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Thimble, the tiny kitten I had rescued just the day before, was gone. The back door was unlatched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed while I slept. Earlier that day, I hadn't planned to be home at all. A storm had swept through Valmere, knocking out power, causing me to return early to check on the heat lamps in Myra's enclosure. It was during this unexpected visit that I discovered her. Thimble was little more than a damp scrap of fur, huddled against the aviary fence. When I first spotted her, I thought she was lifeless, but then she lifted her head, her wide, trusting eyes meeting mine. She mewed softly, as if to say, "I'm here to stay." Myra, the owl who usually commanded attention with her fierce presence, had been watching silently from her perch. As I approached to pick up the kitten, she did something unexpected. She shifted closer to Thimble. It wasn't an act of aggression. It felt more like a protective stance, a quiet curiosity rather than a threat. The idea of a stray kitten being with a raptor was at best foolish and, at worst, dangerous. Yet, as I wrapped Thimble in a towel and started administering warm fluids, I hesitated. Myra had not flared her feathers or displayed any signs of discomfort. She simply stood there, an enigma, watching over the fragile creature with an uncharacteristic softness. By nightfall, I felt a small sense of relief as Thimble settled into her shoebox, appearing more comfortable and relaxed. I thought that would be the end of our strange encounter, but the morning proved otherwise. The absence of the tiny kitten was jarring. It marked a shift I couldn't yet understand. What compelled Thimble to leave? Did she sense the presence of Myra outside, unfazed by boundaries we tend to impose? Questions lingered as I contemplated that quiet moment in my home. Sometimes our expectations about animal behavior are challenged in surprising ways. And as I stood there, contemplating the emptiness of the shoebox, I felt a stirring curiosity about what might unfold next. After all, life here in Valmere was never quite as predictable as one might hope. Stepping into the pale light of the back garden, I noticed her at the base of Myra's enclosure. There was Thimble, nestled comfortably, just inside the gate I could have sworn I locked. It was a scene so natural, a kitten sleeping in the hollow beneath the perch, yet it caught me off guard. Turning my attention to Myra, I found her still and grand in the soft light. Uncharacteristically, she didn't move when I opened the gate. Her amber eyes remained fixed on mine, but there was something different about her gaze. It wasn't the usual predator's glance. Instead, it had a weight to it, a steady recognition, almost as if she understood our shared space. When I crouched down to gather Thimble back into my arms, Myra tilted her head slowly. It felt like an acknowledgement, a silent allowance of sorts, that left me pondering its meaning. Over time, I began to notice subtle shifts in Myra. She used to sit for hours without a twitch, but now she paced the edges of her enclosure. This wasn't agitation, it was a newfound awareness. Interestingly, she had begun to hunt less effectively, often leaving her mice untouched while Thimble crept closer to her perch each day. I found myself wrestling with my instincts and the proper protocols. Was this a shift in the natural order, or something uniquely extraordinary unfolding before me? Sia, my volunteer, was the first to identify the changes more clearly. She pointed out the slight limp in Myra's gait and the tremor in her left wing. I tried to convince myself it was just the cold, or perhaps a sign of aging. However, when Jonah came with his mobile kit, he revealed what I had dreaded to confront. The wing we believed had healed was beginning to deteriorate. Scar tissue had thickened and was pressing on the nerves. It brought distressing news. Myra was in pain, and without surgery, she risked losing complete function in her left wing. This hit me harder than I anticipated. I had always understood that Myra couldn't return to the wild, yet I created a dignified existence for her here, a realm where she ruled as a queen. The option of surgery loomed, filled with uncertainties. The stress it could cause, the confinement she would endure, and the possibility she might need to be relocated to a sanctuary if things worsened. As Jonah and I discussed her treatment, Thimble serenely brushed her tiny head against Mara's talons, blissfully unaware of the fragility of the moment we were sharing. The evening air was thick with uncertainty as whispers of an extraordinary bond began to travel through Valmere. A curious mix of townsfolk gathered outside my fence, peering in at an owl and a kitten, an unusual duo that seemed to defy nature. People held their phones low, capturing the scene quietly, a testament to the unspoken reverence they felt for what they were witnessing. Each step they took felt heavy. It was as if their presence was creating a crack in my carefully constructed world. Among the onlookers, Sia stood out. She had begun sketching Mara and Thimble, portraying them as if they were characters from a fairy tale. Mara, the steadfast protector, and Thimble, the gentle miracle. For her, this wasn't mere rescue, it was fate intertwining their lives. When I broached the subject of potential surgery, her reaction surprised me. Her face tightened, challenging my thoughts with a defiant glare. "You'd separate them now?" Sia asked, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic intensity, as if my suggestion was an affront to something untouchable. I often thought about Mara's eyes. It wasn't just her appearance that drew me in. It was that silent plea they seemed to convey. Over the years spent with animals, I had learned to identify pain, even when it tried to hide itself. But with Mara, the feeling ran much deeper. She had grown quieter, her movements slower, yet she welcomed Thimble's presence. The kitten nestled against her breast feathers, purring gently, as if they were meant to be together. But despite the tenderness of the moment, a sense of dread clung to me. What if something was wrong beneath that calm exterior? That night, Elsie arrived, bringing herbal salves and questions that weighed on my mind. She shared folklore about forest owls adopting orphaned creatures during times of unrest, a healing connection across species. I almost laughed at the idea, but when she leaned closer and suggested that perhaps Myra had chosen Thimble, I resisted the urge to dismiss her words. Then there was Jonah, whose practical approach clashed with the unfolding narrative. He cautioned me that such cross-species bonds were unnatural. "You're projecting your wishes, Callum," he said. "It's just an owl and just a kitten." His voice was steady, yet I found myself doubting his certainty. And then Ronan Bell from Animal Control showed up, clipboard in hand. His presence brought a chill as he recited policy like it was a script drawn from authority. "Cross-species bonding is unstable, Callum. This isn't a safe situation. The owl is wild, the kitten isn't. You can't monitor them forever." Though he was not unkind, there was an undeniable coldness in his words. As these conversations weaved in and out of my thoughts, I began to question everything. I wondered about the depth of this bond and whether I should fight for it or let nature take its course. The night was quiet, with the lights off and only the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. I stood at the door of the enclosure, listening intently. Then, beneath the gentle beat of feathers, I heard it, a soft, steady purr. In that moment, everything else faded, the worries and uncertainties that clouded my mind. Earlier that evening, my thoughts had been elsewhere. I had found a notice pinned to the shed door, indicating that my license review was pending, effective immediately. The weight of this news was heavy, yet it paled in comparison to my growing concern for Myra. Her health was clearly failing. She refused food entirely, her body weakening despite the steadfast gaze she held when Thimble nestled into her feathers. Thimble, unaware of the seriousness of the situation, began to mimic Myra's behavior. She climbed the lower branches of Myra's perch, tilting her head and blinking slowly, as if she belonged there, caught in a world of instinct and comfort. Watching them, I felt torn between my role as a caretaker and an observer, caught in a dilemma I couldn't resolve. Every day I found myself watching them more than tending to my tasks. An inner voice of experience urged me to act, to keep Thimble inside, to prepare Myra for surgery, to safeguard whatever I could before everything unraveled. Yet each time I opened that gate, Myra stirred, reassuring me with her gaze. She saw me, not as a threat, but as a presence outside their bond. And Thimble had changed. She no longer called out for food or me. The only time she resisted my efforts to carry her indoors was when she dug her claws into the earth beneath Myra's perch, a silent plea that nearly broke my heart. I knew a decision loomed on the horizon. The need for surgery was pressing, but taking Mara would mean separating her from Thimble. The thought of disrupting their connection was daunting. It could unravel what little strength Mara held. Yet keeping them together felt like embracing an unknown force, something beyond my control and impossible to protect. Earlier that day, I had discovered eerie signs around the enclosure. Small, white-tipped feathers scattered in a half-moon shape near the ravine, not belonging to Mara, and deep scratch marks on the aviary fence. Clear signs of something probing for a way in, not the curiosity of a raccoon. With these discoveries weighing on my mind, I set up the trail cam that night. What secrets lay ahead? The evening was quiet, the kind that made you reflect. I found myself spending the night in the enclosure, unable to sleep. I watched Mara, an owl whose presence felt both regal and fragile. Her eyes blinked slowly under the moonlight. Thimble, the young kitten, curled beneath her wing, a picture of trust. Together, they seemed to provide each other with a sense of purpose, a kind of solace that made me realize I was the only one without a clear path forward. Earlier that day, I came across footage that chilled me. A badger, young and bold, was circling the enclosure. It stood on its hind legs, pawing at the protective mesh. The unsettling realization hit me hard. Thimble had been inside with Mara the entire time, vulnerable and unprotected. I kept this disturbing news from Sia at first. I didn't want to upset her or ignite her determination to somehow fix things. But the moment she discovered the footage on my laptop, her silence spoke volumes. She stared blankly, then quietly asked, "They're not safe here anymore, are they?" I couldn't provide her with an answer. Later that evening, the vet confirmed the date for Mara's surgery, just 4 days away. A message from Ronan added to the weight on my shoulders, his voice clipped. "You're harboring an unstable dynamic," he warned. "If anything happens, Callum, it's on you." As the days passed, I started to keep the enclosure gate unlatched each night, not out of negligence, but as an intentional choice. I felt increasingly that I was not keeping Mara and Thimble safe. Rather, they were finding strength in one another. Mara had stopped eating unless Thimble was close by. The tiny kitten would nudge a quail egg with her face, encouraging Mara to engage. The elder owl would nibble at it half-heartedly, as if it were a gesture motivated more by concern for Thimble than her own needs. Sia began visiting daily after school, her chatter replaced by a quiet reverence as she moved through the garden. She brought along sketchbooks filled with her drawings, capturing moments that took my breath away. One particularly haunting image showed Thimble standing like a guardian beneath Mara's wings, while the owl appeared to gaze at the stars with a hint of sadness. "She's fading," Sia remarked one evening, "but she's not afraid, maybe because she knows she won't be alone." Elsie returned with a story that intrigued me, one about an ancient healer's tale from the Highlands. She spoke of an owl and a fox cub, both abandoned, who survived a blizzard together. "Sometimes the forest does strange things when it wants something to live," she said thoughtfully, "even if the rest of the world doesn't understand." Jonah, too, began to soften. After a quiet evening observing the pair, he reflected aloud, "You ever think maybe this bond is what's keeping her alive?" I didn't respond, nor did I need to. The truth was already there, quietly woven into the fabric of their story. The evening before I had to make my final decision, an unusual stillness settled over the house. It felt as though the walls were straining to hear my thoughts. Jonah and I sat at the kitchen table, blueprints for a makeshift surgical space laid out before us. He mentioned that while we could attempt the procedure here, it would be a delicate situation. The risks associated with anesthesia in a non-sterile environment were high, and without any backup staff, our margin for error was thin. If she wakes up confused or panicked, he warned, there's a chance she could lash out, and that would put the kitten in danger. I didn't need him to finish that thought. I understood the stakes clearly. 3 days prior, Ronan had come back, not with warnings, but with a firm notice demanding I relocate Mara to a wildlife rehabilitation center by the end of the week. The shelter board had cited public safety and animal welfare policies, leaving no room for discussion. As I held the paper in my quivering hand, what troubled me most wasn't the ultimatum itself. It was the absence of recognition regarding the bond that was growing between Mara and Thimble. After Ronan left, I found myself drawn to the enclosure, where Mara stood in her usual spot, head low and feathers fluffed out slightly. What struck me was how Thimble had begun to mirror her movements, stretching her little body and blinking in sync with the owl. I stood there, captivated, grappling with the realization that I had some control over this, yet felt utterly unequipped to handle it. That night, I reached out to Jonah, inquiring if there was any chance we could perform the surgery on site. He paused before responding. "It's risky, but I'll ask the board." I could only hope there was a way forward. When I told Sia about the relocation order, her response was filled with raw emotion. She sat quietly on the porch for hours, wrapping her arms around her knees before finally speaking. Her words were soft but resolute. "If you send them away, they'll break." The weight of her statement sat heavily with me. Part of me wanted to insist that I didn't have any options, but deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I had choices, but none of them felt right. As the night wore on and the wind picked up, I moved Thimble's blanket closer to Mara's perch. In a moment that felt profound, Myra stretched out one of her wide feathered wings, not in warning, but as an invitation. With an unexpected gentleness, she pulled the tiny kitten beneath her, creating a shared warmth that spoke volumes about their connection. For the first time, it seemed as if a fragile peace had settled between them, and I was left to ponder the path ahead and the choices it demanded of me. Dawn broke quietly, the forest still wrapped in a silver mist, each branch and leaf holding its breath. Inside the barn, the makeshift surgical tent felt heavy with tension. Jonah moved with a steady focus, checking monitors and preparing the anesthesia drip, while Sia sat nearby, cradling Thimble against her chest. The little creature purred nervously, but Sia refused to leave. "She needs to hear us," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. Mara on her perch was surprisingly calm. I approached her, gently lifting her without resistance. She felt heavier than I remembered, a reminder of just how far we had come. As I laid her down, I murmured soft reassurances, feeling the weight of the moment. Jonah adjusted the mask over her beak, and she blinked slowly, as if taking in the room one last time. The surgery began, and for the next 47 minutes, the world seemed to shrink. The sounds of gloves rustling, breath hissing through masks, and the faint beeping of the heart monitor filled the air. I focused on Mara's chest, watching for any sign of distress. Outside, the wind stirred, rattling the barn's old wooden frame, while Sia whispered to Thimble, repeating, "She's coming back. She's coming back." It was then, 34 minutes in, that everything changed. Mara stopped breathing. Just like that, the room fell silent. Jonah's voice broke through the stillness. Callier, before the chaos of the surgery, Sia had stood determined at the doorway, arms folded, her eyes sentinels of defiance. "I'll stay with her during the surgery. I'll hold Thimble. I'll talk to Mara. She knows me now." I had sensed her resolve and raised my hand to silence Jonah as he started to protest. Sia had made up her mind. The night before had offered a moment of connection. As I stepped into the enclosure, I found Mara perched quietly, her feathers fluffed and breathing slow. Thimble slept beside her, curled in comfort against the shadow of the larger bird. When I approached, Mara gazed at me with a softness that felt like permission, perhaps even trust. "Tomorrow, we try," I whispered. She didn't respond, but the wind seemed to carry her understanding, a promise that she was ready for the journey ahead. As dawn broke over the Scottish Highlands, the warmth of morning light streamed through the barn, illuminating the scene within. Callum knelt beside Mara, his heart racing as he withdrew his shaking hands from her still body. She lay covered in a blanket on the table. A mere moments ago, her life had hung in the balance. Thimble, the little kitten, approached cautiously, eyes wide with concern, and pressed himself against her side, letting out a small, hopeful mewl. In the hushed atmosphere, time seemed to stretch. Sia sat back, a bloodied swab in hand, tears brimming in her eyes as she willed the owl to breathe. Callum's throat felt tight as he reached out to comfort Thimble, who had nestled in Mara's soft feathers. Suddenly, a twitch caught their attention. Mara's talons curled slightly, and the monitor next to her let out a gentle beep, signaling a fragile rhythm that had returned. Relief rushed through Callum, and he found himself laughing, a sound that quickly turned into a sob. At that moment, Mara's eyes opened, revealing a flicker of amber light. A faint, questioning hoot escaped her lips, barely more than a whisper. Thimble, sensing her awakening, purred and nestled closer under her wing. With great effort, Myra shifted, cradling the kitten protectively against her. Sia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and broke into a shaky smile, pressing one hand against her heart. Tears flowed from Callum as a wave of wonder washed over him. In that quiet moment, dust motes danced in the sunlight, weaving a bond among the unlikely family formed in the barn. Myra was alive, albeit fragile, and Thimble stared up at her as if in a dream. Though the future remained uncertain, a sense of hope wrapped around them like a warm embrace. It was here, in the gentle rise and fall of Myra's chest, that Thimble found the comfort of a mother's love. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It wasn't necessarily louder, but something intangible seemed to settle within the walls, making everything feel softer and more alive. Myra, still weak, often rested with her head tucked under her wing, yet she was starting to eat again, albeit slowly. Thimble remained a constant presence, curling into the folds of her feathers, his small body rising and falling with Myra's shallow breath, much like the tide gently caressing the shore. In my years of working with wildlife, I'd never encountered a bond quite like the one I observed between Myra and Thimble. Their connection felt special, both tender and unexpected. Every afternoon after school, Sia would arrive, sketchbook in hand. Her drawings shifted from whimsical tales to real, heartfelt depictions. Instead of fairies, her art captured the fatigue and resilience reflected in Myra's gentle eyes, alongside Thimble's unwavering loyalty. Jonah visited less often, but when he did, he would stand quietly by the enclosure, absorbed in the scene before him. We often wondered how much time Myra had left. Would it be a matter of months, or perhaps even weeks? Or could she surprise us all? Regardless, the moments they shared were precious. Myra rested with her wings stretched wide, a small kitten nestled beside her, finally free of barriers that once separated them. Did we witness something truly extraordinary, or was it simply a glimpse into nature at its most beautiful? It made me think, perhaps Myra wasn't destined for motherhood, but she chose that path. Thimble, with her delicate determination, simply asked for it. If you found the story inspiring, take a moment to reflect on it. Sometimes, love manifests in the most surprising ways, whether in the quiet rustle of feathers, a soft mule at the edge of a cage, or choices driven by instinct rather than reason. We may never fully grasp what transpired between Thimble and Myra, but maybe that's okay. The magic lies in the fact that it happened at all. Have you ever felt that connections can transcend boundaries? That healing can arise in unexpected forms, and trust can exist even in the most unlikely relationships? If so, then you're part of this story too. We aim to continue sharing these remarkable moments of rescue and the subtle miracles of life. If you'd like to stay updated, consider subscribing. What would you have done if you were in Callum's position? And don't forget to share this with someone who might need a little hope today. Sometimes, all it takes is a brave question and the willingness to respond.